Hello, my name is Ben Maguire. I am a criminal barrister and I practice out of a chambers called QEB Hollis Whiteman. Just to give you an introduction as to the sort of life I have and the sort of things that I get up to on a day-to-day basis. I walk into chambers, I go to my pigeonhole where the papers or briefs as we call them might arrive. The sort of cases I can receive are anything from a minor road traffic matter, representing, for example, a personality, a pop star or a BBC presenter, to horrific murders. Murders play a significant part of my career. Last year, for example, I represented an individual by the name of Mark Dixie who committed a horrific murder on a young girl called Sally Ann Bowman. That was a difficult and traumatic case. Traumatic because of the press and also the nature of the allegation he faced. And what happens is I might walk in the chambers and suddenly that brief appears on my desk. Another day I might have to go off to prison and see a client. Or I might have to go to the Court of Appeal. Again, a very exciting but terrifying experience. I like to obviously get very well prepared for these cases, but it helps that although I'm not wearing my robes and my wig today, when I wear my robe and my wig, it does act somehow, or something like armour, I suppose. I get dressed up and I get into character, I suppose is the fairest way of putting it.
Ben, what you mentioned the Court of Appeal being quite, terrifying perhaps, but what is so special or tough about it?
The difference between a normal court, when I say normal court I mean a crown court where you're dealing with a judge and a jury, is that you're appearing in front of 3 to 5 judges, and they are the top judges in the country who, as you can imagine, have brains the size of the universe, and they always have this wonderful ability to ask you the one question you haven't prepared for. I'm sure that there is some sort of training that they go through in order to do that. But normally when you go to the Court of Appeal, you are appealing on a specific matter of law, and that matter of law will be the subject of the appeal, and that issue may have wide-ranging effects, not only in your case, but on a whole number of cases across the criminal spectrum. One of the most amazing things about my job is that I sit in obviously I sit preparing a case with my client, and we go through the ups and downs of a trial, and the extraordinary and the most amazing theatre of my job is when it comes to the end, the jury come in, those 12 strangers obviously to the defendant, and they sit down, the foreman of the jury stand up, and in that moment when they're deciding whether or not to return verdicts of guilty or not guilty, my client is either leaving and walking out the main door with me, or he is going to prison largely for the majority of the rest of his life. And I still find it difficult to cope with that moment when the foreman returns the verdict. Especially in a case like that, he was either walking out of the main door of the prison, or he was going to jail probably for a minimum of 30 years. It was obviously a planned murder. So there are extraordinary moments in my career where my heart is booming out of my chest. That is of course different to going to the Court of Appeal where you are addressing 3 people with extraordinary brains. Again, it's different when you're going to the more minor courts in the country where you may be representing somebody on what would in relative terms be described as more minor crime, but in fact it's a very, very serious thing for that, because the consequences, for example, of a police officer being prosecuted for drink driving is the end of his career, is the end of his pension, and can be the end of his home that is provided by the police. So there are wide-ranging aspects and consequences of what I do, not only in terms of the fact of a criminal conviction and the penalty, but often the ancillary consequences, and especially now.
Ben, general advice that you'd give for someone who is thinking of entering the career?
Advice for somebody who is thinking of entering the career: you've got to get a very good degree from a largely a good university. I would have thought a 2-1 is a minimum, and then you go off to bar school. A 2-1 really will probably get you an interview, and no more than that. The competition is crazy. Thank God I'm not going through the process now. I'm sure I would never have got to where I am now had I been applying at this stage, because not only are the sort of applications that I see, they've got a minimum of a 2-1, but they've also shown a strong interest in a career at the bar. Again, I work in the criminal bar. It's important, it's only important to me that you have an interest in criminal law, having, we call them mini pupilages, which is a week of shadowing another barrister, or indeed you can shadow a judge as well. That's also very interesting to do, because you get a different perspective in terms of the court itself. You have to be confident to a certain extent. There are people who are not very confident in their normal life, but once they put in on their armour of their wig and gown, they change personality. It's quite extraordinary. It's I suppose in some ways the accurate comparison is an actor. You have very shy actors who, once they appear on stage or in front of the camera, they take on a completely new persona, and there are comparisons with the bar. You have to, as I say, have academic ability, you have to be enthusiastic. The hours can be very unattractive. If, for example, you're instructed very late in a case, you might have to prepare the case all night and go straight to court. It's not a particularly attractive prospect, but you're a self-employed person, and the upside of the times when you have to work all night is that you might have a day when, like today, sunny day, and once I'm finished this, I'm going to go off and play golf.